This week, we welcome Carl Trebus, SVP of Product Management and General Manager, Application Security at Imperva, to discuss unintended consequences, evolution of applications, APIs, and where they run. In our second segment, we are going to cover some communications and leadership articles. We've got some good stuff queued up there. Looking forward to that as well. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly.
Is your organization finding it difficult to achieve compliance and scale its security posture? As G2's highest rated cloud compliance software, Drata streamlines your SOC 2, ISO 27001, PCI DSS, HIPAA, GDPR, and many more security frameworks, and provides continuous 24-hour control monitoring so you can focus on scaling securely. Drata is also the only compliance automation platform with a private tenant database. That's like having your cake and securing it too. Listeners of Business Security Weekly get 10% off Drata by visiting securityweekly.com/Drata. That's DRATA.
Cybercriminals are working overtime. Last year in the fourth quarter alone, phishing attacks disguised as COVID testing information increased by 521%. Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cybercriminals use them to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. Find out about the 13 email threat types and how Barracuda can provide complete email protection for your teams, your customers, and your reputation. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, improve compliance and audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys.
All right, and welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode 276, recorded September 12th, 2022. I'm Adrian Sanabria, standing in for Matt Alderman today. I guess I didn't mess up enough last time in August when I stood in for him, so I got invited back to do it again. With me today is Jason Albuquerque. How are you, Jason?
I'm doing well, Adrian. How are you? Typically in this intro, we'll talk about the NFL and what's happening in football, but I'm a little embarrassed at my Patriots this week, so we'll skip that.
Yeah. We it was everywhere I went this weekend. There was NFL. You know, I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee, which is a college town, so we get the Volunteers here. There's just a sea of orange, and honestly, the only sport I follow is Formula One. So, you know, but by the time you hit noon on Sundays, I'm done. You know, especially most of the season's over in the Middle East or in Europe or something like that, which I kind of like. I kind of like my whole day not getting taken over by the sports that I watch.
There you go.
But yeah, we'll have the USGP here in October. So
very cool.
And then they'll hit Mexico. So we'll have a few in this time zone. That'll be pretty nice. But I think my local team, the Volunteers, actually won against was it Pittsburgh? I don't even know. I'm gonna get kicked out of Knoxville shortly after this. All right, some quick announcements here. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list Discord server and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms, which include YouTube and Twitch. Security Weekly listeners save 20% on InfoSec World 2022 passes. InfoSec World will be held September 27th through the 29th at Disney's Coronado Springs Resort in Lake Buena Vista, Florida, and coming up pretty soon, just a couple of weeks. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW and use the code ISW22-SecWeek20 to secure your spot now. All right, today, this interview is sponsored by Imperva, and we have Carl with us today. The topic is going to be unintended consequences, evolution of applications, APIs, and where they run. Carl has been in the tech and security product management space for over 3 decades in senior leadership positions at F5, AWS, Foundry Networks, and Alcatel. He's currently the SVP of Product Management and General Manager Application Security at Imperva. And I'm a product manager as well. So welcome, Carl. Welcome to Business.
Great. Oh, hey, guys. Thanks for having me here today. Excited to talk about this.
Yeah, good stuff. So it's totally new to me. So it's going to be interesting talking to somebody who's been doing product management as long as you have. I guess not totally new to me. I've been working in the vendor space for about 3 years now. But this is my first official role on the product side. You know, I've definitely had influence over product before, but I absolutely love it. I love running product. I love getting to. I have very strong opinions, so it's satisfying to me.
Yeah, no, that's great. You know, I started out in the engineering world, and then over time, what you learn is that you can build great things. But getting them to market and getting them to your customers and finding the customers, that's the real trick to innovation, if you ask me. Because there's plenty of things you can do. It's just what can you do and actually make a market for. And so that's what I really liked about that transition to product, is really helping dial in solutions and work with the broad team to target those markets, those customers, and really satisfy a need and go win in that space. And so that's the fun aspect of it, if you ask me.
Yeah, and with most of the companies it looks like you've worked for, you have the additional challenge of dealing with architecture. You know, like with SaaS apps, it's one thing. You know, like the company I'm working for, we're building a third-party risk management SaaS app. You know, so we don't have the kind of we do connect to cloud services and stuff like that, but it's all API and things like that. We're not having to worry about what hardware people are installing it on, line speed, throughput, all that kind of stuff, which you absolutely get into in some of the spaces that you've been involved in and where you are today. So that's a whole nother aspect of it that I haven't had to deal with. I'm sure is also challenging.
Yeah, I mean, when you deploy in these on-premise worlds, you actually have to anticipate all these different scenarios, these different use cases, and how customers are going to use it, plus all the different types of infrastructure you may have to plug into and work with. And so it does create a bunch of complexities, working in that world. And of course, we get the both of the best worlds at Imperva, because we provide a SaaS service. And then we provide, on-premise or cloud-based options. And so we kind of provide that true hybrid. And so in some ways you get the best of both worlds, in some ways you get the worst, just because of the complexities of both those worlds, and navigating those. But it really is, like you're saying, is the world has changed, right? In terms of, how technology is built and consumed. In the past, back when I started my career years ago, everything was just typical waterfall, right?
Yeah.
In fact, typically you would sell a box with software that ran on it. And then that started to change then to software you would build, and then you would sell that software and it would run somewhere else. But it was still kind of the same software. It was just basically a monolithic version of something you shipped on a disk. And then as cloud came along and other things, it started to radically change how you did things, because now you could offer things dynamically as a SaaS or a service, right? And that's really what's pervading the world right now, is this notion of being able to provide, these types of services. Now, I think things are evolving, because I think it's getting to that next level with cloud native, where now customers or organizations want to be able to consume, services or software in a seamless way, regardless of where their applications are running, because, applications now become heavily distributed, in the global economy. And so having better mechanisms to manage it, versus big chunky code running in big data centers, but more distributed with edge compute and all that, that changes the game. And cloud native technologies like Kubernetes and containers and APIs and all the technologies surrounding that, CI/CD models have radically changed, how applications are built and pulled together.
Yeah, and I mean, I come from the MSP world, right? So, and that's the last decade or more of my life is helping our customers through this journey. And so many organizations they're stuck in that hybrid model because they have to be, right? The conversations that we're having are, do we go cloud native out of the gate? Are our applications cloud ready? Is our architecture cloud ready? Or is it a scenario where I know, some organizations are dealing with legacy applications that they can't migrate to the cloud at the moment, right? So they're forced to stay on-prem. There's engineering firms that we work with who have invested millions and millions and millions of dollars in devices that they're not ready to invest or can't afford to invest to upgrade right now. So they're stuck in that hybrid model for quite some time.
We absolutely see the same things. In fact, that's been the story of what I've seen in the last 5-6 years, is that companies have this thesis they want to migrate the cloud, or they want to change how their infrastructure is used and leveraged, but it's just that movement requires typically this massive refactoring or changing of their code or moving, like you said, sometimes they're buoyed to these third-party apps. And so what winds up being more efficient is maybe leveraging cloud-native technologies to manage these apps and automation and manage those versus trying to move those. In fact, I think an interesting stat that I like to look at is that last year the entire cloud market, if you just look at cloud service providers, was about $180 billion. But the global IT spend was almost $4.3 trillion. Mm-hmm. And so cloud is certainly an important aspect of whatever we do going forward in the tech world. And it's growing, but there is a massive amount of dollars being spent elsewhere that helps manage customers' businesses. And we just have to recognize that you want to have that kind of flexibility in your offerings to support that model and allow customers to maximize their choice, manage their cost, maximize leverage.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I mean, to your point, Carl, so many CIOs that I talk to will throw down the comment of, if this were a brand new business that I was building greenfield, I would go cloud 100% all the way. But, I'm dealing with a 90-year-old firm that I just became CIO 3 years ago, and I got to put them on a 10-year journey. I got to put them on a 10-year journey to get there, right?
That doesn't take into account mergers and acquisitions, too. If you've got a scale strategy and you're trying to integrate something into cloud native that's not naturally cloud native, you run into an entirely different problem that could have security implications.
Yeah, and I think it's also important with that is that people will say, I'm containerizing, that's cloud native. That's not cloud native. That's just rewrapping something and getting it to run in a different format. Cloud native is really, programmability, APIs, stateless models, things being broken up, microservices, things like that actually really enable that model. And most organizations aren't there yet. It's still very nascent in what we see. And so that's why I think the benefits of all those cloud native technologies, as they start to get realized over the next 5 years, are going to allow customers to run wherever they want to run. And so they just will get better leverage, right? You can run on generic servers, you could run in cloud, it doesn't matter. You'll be able to move things. And, that's where I think the real future is for applications, is that choice and that flexibility.
Yeah, the name of the game is really flexibility, going forward. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of people think of cloud as like the goal is moving everything there. But honestly, if parts of your business, logistics is more comfortable with SAP, why rush it? Why screw that up? I once worked for a large company that was consolidating ISPs back when broadband was first coming out in the late 90s and early 2000s. And they just had this completely unflexible model of, okay, we're going to come in, we're going to drop our web DNS, customer front end stack, Sun Microsystems, like they had them pre-racked and everything. They'd literally just come in, drop in the stack, try and migrate everything over. And in the process, it was just a nightmare. Like they destroyed everything that was unique and interesting about these companies. All the BBSs went away. Everything that had made these profitable and interesting companies. Like in one case, we acquired Nashville.com and we lost 90% of the subscribers, before we got everything working right, because we just rushed in there, didn't realize how complicated their setup was, their tech. And rushed it, let go of the people who knew how things worked, before we had figured out things and gotten customers migrated over. And customers were without email for months.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah,
now do that.
Now
could you
translate
imagine?
that. Go ahead,
Oh,
Carl.
sorry,
Sorry.
guys. I was going to say, could you imagine being without email for an hour right now?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
or
right.
or Slack or whatever these services. I mean, things grind to a halt.
I was going to go even deeper than that, Carl. Imagine being without your ERP system that runs the business for that amount of time, right? I mean, think about that. That's where you're going to have an issue. I mean, so many organizations over time would take a platform like SAP and they'd Frankenstein it and they'd make it their own, right? They'd make it their own custom build. A lot of times you can't translate that over to a cloud build, right? Because all your feature functionality and customizations will go away.
So does that leaving us more vulnerable right now? Because what we've ended up at is a dependency on interoperability. In order to survive and be part of a diverse business network, we're leveraging all of these platforms. And as a SaaS or cloud only company, then we're relying on all these API calls, all these third-party SaaS services. That interoperability in order to survive may be our Achilles heel at the same time.
Yeah, it's a strength and a weakness, right? All at the same time. That is, it opens up this ecosystem for accessing things. The problem is it's opening up this ecosystem and it creates this giant kind of a surface now where you're pulling data from all these different sources or you're accessing different applications. I mean, using your phone right now, typically you're accessing, any application is pulling data probably across, a dozen different APIs, for example. And so I think it's made it easier to collect data. Like I could write an app from my phone right now where I could easily access Google Maps. I could pull data from different sources and I could do something very quickly. So that's great. It gives me, the problem is now I've opened up all these different portals to different data. And so I think that's the big issue when you talk about safety and security is that this notion of what data am I actually, what data am I accessing? Where's it coming from? Or what data am I allowing my third-party customers to go, or my customers to go and access and deal with. One of the other aspects too, I think that was brought up here was about availability. And I think that's a critical component when we talk about modern applications is maintaining that high availability. And it's not just the problem of like infrastructure and ensuring like, hey, my backends are redundant, I have compute, I have storage and things like that running. It's ensuring that malicious users can't block or take down my systems or do things that affect that availability. DDoS is probably a great example of that, is that you can dial up some devastating DDoS attacks for $100. And so, that's a very simplistic idea but it's all about availability in that case. So, it's app uptime, availability, and, managing what kind of data and what's actually being taken or accessed in your systems is the way I look at it.
And that's a great point, Carl, because I think the expectations, if cloud has changed nothing else, cloud DevOps, all these trends that we've seen, it's changed expectations, not only, investor and business expectations in the speed at which you run, but also from consumers. Like I ended up moving to neobanks and away from my traditional credit union because every time I went to log into my credit union, they were down for maintenance. Like they still take systems down on Sunday for maintenance. And when am I usually, fiddling around with personal finance and budget stuff? On the weekend, right? So it's just completely unacceptable to not be able to access your financial records all day Sunday, every Sunday.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about that availability, and if you can't maintain that, then you're going to be at a disadvantage to business, to your competitors who can, and especially if your business is dependent upon it. Imagine your like ERP system or CRM systems not being available for part of the day, or imagine it's the last day of the quarter, you're a public company, and suddenly you can't book orders, and that may be the big time. So those are the types of things that businesses or organizations look at. Is maintaining their business, continuity, and the security aspects of that have become, kind of a number one issue, and specifically APIs have just become such a huge area of exploit now in the last couple of years. They talk about last year alone, they talked about $50 billion of loss globally of companies, through exploits across APIs, and so that's a good example of just various, either it's preventing business operations, data was exfiltrated, or things were taken. And it's just become a new area to create havoc, unfortunately.
Companies have had to actually pay the piper finally in their web apps. Well, they've secured the front end UI. They've went to all the inputs and done the validation and security testing. All of the same functionality the attackers have known have existed on the API. Now I can just do it quicker with my scripts and through functionality that's still existing in wide gaping holes. So it's coming to the point where people that are doing good security are being realized as doing good security.
Yeah, you're right about that. In fact, APIs are really interesting in that typically, for a typical web app, like you got your web front end, you got your app back end, and then you got your database tier and all that. And typically you've kind of developed and you have process around that. Well, APIs are developed by, I should say developers, right? I mean, engineers, software guys. And their whole goal is to get business logic, get this thing working, let's get it open and let's get access, right? And it bypasses your typical permissions, right? You don't typically have, there's no app sitting between it and your back end. Typically APIs are accessing directly out of the database. And so now you've kind of created this shortcut, an easy way to get in. And so it just opens up a new hole, I guess, in your firewall, if you will, in terms of what can leak out. And so that's, and to your point, Tyler, automation makes that much easier. That is that whole issue of being able to, pull up botnets very quickly and do these like brute force attacks. Or even what I think is interesting is just how they use them to surveil. They'll come in with, and they'll surveil your application, probe for weaknesses, and they can just do this on an ongoing basis. So let's say you have some maintenance or something that happens periodically, and when you go into maintenance, it opens up some security hole. Maybe it opens up port 22 or something like that. Boom, then they're in there because they're constantly on top of you. And so that's the problem is they only have to win once. You got to win 100% of the time to keep them out. And so, having a strategy around that, it's really important.
Yeah, and APIs are interesting. I think we got away for a pretty long time with APIs to where, they were somewhat less visible, less tested and attacked. And I think that's passed at this point. I think, especially now that everybody has an API, and API is, again, one of those new expectations, that customers tend to have. And there's more and more automation around that, with things like, I think it's called Microsoft Flow. Is that their?
It used to be Flow. Now it's Business Dynamics.
Of course, they changed it.
Of course,
it's their entire Power Platform that they have these days. Right?
Yeah, Power BI. That's what it is. Power BI.
It's Power BI. It's they have Power Apps that you can build now.
Yeah.
There's just so many low code, no code options within the Microsoft suite these days to integrate your applications together, to build automations, to build orchestrations. And, Microsoft in their quest to dominate the world, they're basically saying we'll integrate with anybody and everybody, right? Yeah. So they're not going to hold any bars back. So.
Yeah, you've got Zapier, you've got Workato, you've got Tray.io, like all these solutions, and you're expected to make connectors for your APIs on top of having that API there. So even more. I guess what I'm trying to say is more and more APIs are becoming more popularized, more visible. So. And more depended on. I've seen a lot of applications where
it just leans toward the need to have security embedded in your DevOps processes, right? We have to operate at the speed of the business. We don't have a choice, right? The speed of the business is dictating that. So, I would rather have it embedded in the development process out of the gate, and then go through testing cycles before you deploy anything, obviously out to production, but organizations need those best practices. They need help in those areas. So many customers are coming in saying, we don't have any security in our development lifecycle. Zero, not.
Yeah, and whatever, the key there too is if you're going to be a part of that developer pipeline, that CI/CD pipeline, or get in the middle of the developer process, is it has to be completely transparent or almost transparent, meaning it can't slow them down. It can't, because they'll work around it. This is the one thing you find out with developers, and I know because I used to be one, is that if there's something that gets in their way, they'll find a way to game it or work around it or do whatever. And it's not malicious. It's not intentional. It's more, or deliberate, I should say. It's more a matter of they got a job to do. They're trying to maximize for that outcome, and that is they want the business logic to work. And so, when we look at like security organizations, they're having a really tough time getting their head around APIs because it just runs at a pace they're not used to. And it's run by developers, like I said, that where they don't really have controls within that CI/CD workflow. So typically, what we're seeing right now is that organizations are just looking for a way to get their heads around this, and that's usually where discovery becomes really important. It's like, hey, let me at least see the problem in a way, and let me see it in a way that doesn't disrupt my developers. I don't have to go to them and ask them to do anything special. I can just look at my APIs, see what kind of data is traversing it, what are my endpoints looking like, and map that all out. So at least they get a picture of the problem. Then they can take more prescriptive actions. Either they could do internal policies, they can then turn on security blocking capabilities like API security solutions. There's other mechanisms like RASP and things like that you can use to protect. But you need to do it in a way that isn't disrupting that pipeline. And that's what I think is critical. Yeah. And I think that's going to be the model going forward. Is you're part of the developer pipeline, but you're transparent to it.
And ideally, getting yourself in the middle of that as early as possible is going to save money no matter how you do it. If you can honestly get in there during the design phases, or at least during the new feature release phase prior to development, then you're really ahead of the curve. But if you can't, like, the earlier you do this, the more painstaking time you're going to save and the money you're going to save.
And the next segment is about leadership and communication, right? So here's the leadership piece of it. Engage the right stakeholders in the process and have them have a say in it. So if you engage your development team, if you engage your business analysts, if you engage them, you learn how to not make friction because you're taking their input, you're taking their suggestions, you're taking their recommendations. They're part of the solution, right? That's where the leadership comes into play, and that's where you can start shifting left and getting in front of that, like Tyler was saying.
Absolutely.
You have to involve the stakeholders.
Yeah, the security teams no longer can just make capricious decisions about what they think they can, hey, you're going to have to take this tool, sorry, that's that. The VPN I talked about earlier is a good example of that. Oh, by the way, you have to use this VPN. Well, guess what? I can't use it all the time because there's problems. And nobody came and talked about our requirements, and so I can see the same problems occurring on the development side where the security team is way off to the side and they have no idea what these developers are doing. And so that early engagement to get a better feel of what processes, what pipelines, where are they deploying, how are they deploying, what types of data. But you also need to provide tools to the organization because the developers also don't have a global view of what's happening either. They only understand what's going into their pipelines, what they're building, but they don't necessarily understand how the world is interacting with that. And that's where the security teams need to partner and work with them, and the business teams as well, is to understand what's important to the business, how are we going to manage this, and then create more of that consolidated view of their security.
And the security implications. Most of the developers and or the security folks don't understand the API security implications, and developers don't really understand what the security implications of those are. So that's an interoperability work.
On that point that Tyler's making there, before we wrap here, I know this is something that we've been seeing change over time. And there's not going to be one right recipe to how you have security teams and dev teams work together, but what are you kind of seeing there? Like how can, customers of your product, for example, be successful in that, do you hire ex-developers that are really AppSec savvy folks on the security side that work with the development team? Do you place security folks into the development team directly, or have people who are more focused on security than others? Because I imagine you do run into situations where somebody is testing their code and they think it doesn't work, because something on the security side is maybe doing some active blocking or something like that. So they need some level of visibility into that to be able to troubleshoot and to make sure their code runs, right?
Yeah, and that's where it goes back to taking kind of an outside-in way to tackle the issue. And that's what we guide is, what we say is it's best to get an inventory. Let's see what basically what is your, you have a transparent mechanism that allows you to see what your APIs are talking to, right? So what endpoints, what do the schemas look like, and what types of data is being transacted, classify all that, because then you get a good view of kind of the picture there. Then you can take that data back to your development teams and say, this is what's happening. And you can create, policies around that so that when they do their development, they can mitigate that. Now, with our solution as well, what you can take and do is actually, based on those scenarios, you can actually create test mechanisms where they can take those in and validate then their APIs against these known exploits or these known issues, right? And so that way, then as they're building, they can test, validate, and run it through their pipelines versus going back and having to rewrite everything or start at the beginning, if that makes sense. So it just gives an ongoing mechanism in the process that inserts itself well. I mean, yeah, you can have DevSecOps and other people, but what I find in development teams, if you're not part of the core team that's developing, it's really hard to kind of be a part-time interloper, trying to prod in and going in there. You really have to come in more you have to fit somehow in that workflow. It's easy enough to insert into the workflow a stage where you say, here, run these tests. Validate against these things and then remediate. And then once you've done that, boom, you can release, right? But it's very difficult, if you're getting in there instructing them how to change coding standards or do things at that level. The team itself needs to respond to that. And so providing kind of policies and mechanisms to do that, I think is more productive than again, trying to invade and get in the middle of it.
I couldn't agree more. That's, one of my strategies over time has always been building evangelists within departments, because those department leaders and evangelists are the subject matter experts, right, in their domain. So, I've always worked with business unit leaders and department heads to identify folks who would lean towards security, who want to learn more about security. Then you build the evangelist within that department. So that way they become the de facto security person within the team, but they also have the respect of the team because they're part of the team, right? And they're baked into that workflow. They're baked into that organization.
Yeah, and I think you said the key thing there, baked into the workflow.
Yep.
That is that you're not disrupting that workflow, because the moment those things get torn up, then that disrupts the whole organization typically, or that and so that's what you want to avoid.
Yeah, and to change hearts and minds, you need trust and influence. So what better way to get trust and influence than to have someone on the team out there evangelizing for security?
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
Good stuff. Carl, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly today.
Yes, thank you guys. Great chatting with you.
All right, make sure you visit securityweekly.com/Imperva to learn more. And stay tuned. When we come back, we've got some leadership and communications articles to discuss.